1. Don't rob the dead. I still remember the exact date, November 18th, 2018. My sister was celebrating her 20th birthday at a rented house with a pool in Cuautla, Mexico. But what I remember with even more clarity is what happened after I left that party, when I found myself in a car with a stranger staring at dead bodies on a deserted highway, and how the dead followed us home. I probably wouldn't have gone to the party at all if Diego, my best friend, hadn't been dating one of the girls who organized it. We drove the 2 hours from Mexico City together, him talking excitedly about his new girlfriend while I gazed out the window at the passing landscape, mentally calculating how long I'd need to stay before I could politely leave. The party was in full swing when we arrived. Reggaeton blared from speakers while my sister's friends clustered around the pool with drinks in hand. Diego quickly found his girlfriend and disappeared into the crowd, leaving me to fend for myself. I grabbed a beer and stood in a corner near the outdoor bar, watching my sister laugh with her friends. She looked so carefree, so unburdened. I envied her that. Sometime between 11:00 and midnight, I noticed Diego and his girlfriend arguing near the pool. They spoke in hushed but tense voices, their body language rigid with anger. I couldn't hear what they were arguing about, but I watched as Diego stormed off, passing right by me without a word and disappearing through the front gate. It took me 20 minutes of waiting and several unanswered texts to realize he had actually driven away, completely forgetting I had ridden with him. Or maybe he hadn't forgotten. Maybe he just didn't care. Either way, I was stranded in Cuautla, over 2 hours from Mexico City, with no way home. I weighed my options. I could stay until morning and catch a bus, but I had work the next day. I could ask my sister for help, but it was her birthday party, and I didn't want to burden her. I could call a taxi, but the cost would exceed what I had in my account. While I was contemplating my next move, I noticed a small group of guests preparing to leave. They were climbing into an old pickup truck, and it appeared there was still room for one more. I didn't know them, had only seen them hovering at the edges of the party, but at this point I was desperate. "Excuse me," I said, approaching as they were getting into the truck. "Are you heading back to Mexico City? My friend left without me, and I need a ride. I can chip in for gas and tolls." The driver, a man in his 40s with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands, sized me up for a moment before nodding. "Get in." He gestured toward the passenger seat. "Thank you so much," I said, relief flooding through me. As I settled into the seat, I noticed the couple in the back seemed to be in the middle of an argument. They weren't speaking, but the tension between them was palpable. The woman, young, probably in her early 20s, sat with her arms crossed, looking out the window. The man beside her kept glancing at her with irritation. "I'm Eduardo," the driver said as we pulled away from the house. "That's my cousin Rafael and his girlfriend Marisol." "Nice to meet you all. I'm Miguel," I replied, trying to sound friendly despite the awkwardness of the situation. "Thanks again for the ride." We drove in uncomfortable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the rumble of the engine and occasional sniffles from Marisol in the back seat. I wondered what they'd been arguing about, but it wasn't my business to ask. As we left the small town and merged onto the highway, the tension in the truck finally erupted. Marisol and Rafael began arguing again, their voices growing louder with each exchange. I couldn't follow it all, something about Rafael flirting with another woman at the party, but the intensity of their anger made me sink lower in my seat, wishing I could disappear. The argument escalated until, without warning, Marisol reached over and pulled the emergency brake. The truck fishtailed wildly. Eduardo cursed and struggled to regain control as we skidded across the highway. My heart leaped into my throat as the headlights of an oncoming car flashed toward us. But somehow Eduardo managed to bring us to a stop on the shoulder without hitting anything. "What the hell are you doing?" Eduardo shouted, turning to face Marisol. "Are you trying to kill us all?" But Marisol wasn't listening. She had pushed the door open and was walking away, back toward the direction we had come from. "Marisol," Rafael called after her. "Don't be stupid. Get back in the truck." She continued walking, her silhouette growing smaller in the darkness. Raphael turned to Eduardo. "Go after her, man. We can't just leave her out here." Eduardo gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "She's the one who chose to walk away. She can find her own way back." "In the middle of the night. We're in the middle of nowhere," Raphael protested. "She should have thought about that before pulling that stunt," Eduardo coldly replied. "She nearly got us all killed." I looked back at Marisol's retreating figure. We were right at the edge of the small urban area, where the last streetlights gave way to the pitch blackness of the highway ahead. It wasn't safe for anyone, especially a young woman, to be out here alone at this hour. "Listen," I said, "I don't want to get involved in your family issues, but he's right. We can't just leave her out here. It's not safe." Eduardo glared at me, then back at Marisol, who was now just a shadow against the distant lights of the town. "Fine," he spat out. "1 minute. If she doesn't come back in 1 minute, we leave without her." He stuck his head out the window and shouted, "Marisol, 1 minute, get back in the truck or we're leaving." She didn't turn around. Eduardo waited, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel impatiently. After what couldn't have been more than 30 seconds, he shook his head. "That's it. I'm done." He started the engine again, and my stomach dropped. They were really going to leave her here. Without thinking, I opened my door. "Stop! I can't be a part of this. Let me out!" "What?" Eduardo looked at me like I was crazy. "I'm not going to sit here while you abandon a woman on a dark highway," I said, 1 foot already out of the truck. "It's not right." At least Raphael had the decency to look ashamed, but he made no move to follow me. "Your choice, man," he muttered. Eduardo just shook his head. "Suit yourself." Without another word, he put the truck in gear and drove off, leaving me standing alone on the shoulder of the road. I stood there a moment watching the tail lights disappear into the distance, wondering if I'd just made a terrible mistake. But when I turned back and saw Marisol's figure still walking away under the dim glow of distant streetlights, I knew I couldn't have done anything else. I jogged to catch up with her, calling out so as not to startle her. "Marisol, wait up. They left me behind too." She stopped and turned, surprise evident on her tear-streaked face. "Why did they leave you?" "Because I told them I wouldn't be part of abandoning you out here," I explained, slightly out of breath. "It's not safe." She studied me for a moment, then wiped her eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly. "But you shouldn't have done that. Now you're stuck out here too." I shrugged, trying to appear more confident than I felt. "We'll figure something out. Maybe we can catch another ride back to town and find a taxi or something." We started walking back toward the lights of the town, which seemed much farther away now that I was on foot. The night was eerily silent except for the occasional car roaring past, none of which slowed down despite our attempts to flag them down. After about 20 minutes of walking with no success, I began to worry. It was well past midnight now, and our chances of finding a ride were diminishing by the minute. I was considering suggesting we find a safe place to wait until morning when headlights appeared behind us. Unlike the others, this car slowed down as it approached. Marisol immediately stuck her thumb out, and to my immense relief, the car, an old sedan, stopped. Before I could approach the car, Marisol had already opened the door and jumped in. The car accelerated almost immediately, speeding past me with Marisol now safely inside. I caught just a glimpse of her looking back at me through the window before the car vanished around a bend. Standing alone on the dark highway, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Marisol hadn't even hesitated. She had seized her chance and left me behind without a second thought, just as Raphael and Eduardo had done to her. So much for solidarity. Now I was truly alone, stranded on a desolate stretch of road in the middle of the night, miles from anywhere. My phone battery was nearly dead, and even if it wasn't, there was hardly any signal out here. I had no choice but to keep walking and hope another car would stop. 6 more cars passed without slowing down. I was beginning to lose hope when finally The seventh vehicle, an old Nissan, pulled over about 50 meters ahead. I ran toward it, heart pounding with relief. Behind the wheel sat an older man, perhaps in his 50s, with graying hair and a time-worn face. He wore dirty work clothes, and his hands were stained with what looked like motor oil or grease. The interior of the car matched the exterior worn seats, with padding poking through a cracked dashboard and a general air of neglect. But at that moment it looked like salvation to me. "Where are you headed?" the man asked, his voice gruff but not unfriendly. "Mexico City," I answered, but honestly anywhere with a bus station would be great at this point. He nodded. "Get in. I'm heading to the city too." I thanked him profusely as I climbed into the passenger seat, noticing that the seat belt was broken and the springs in the seat dug uncomfortably into my back. Still, I was so grateful for the ride that I wouldn't have complained even if he had asked me to ride in the trunk. "I'm Victor," the man said, pulling the car back onto the highway. "What are you doing out here alone at this hour?" I explained my situation. Diego abandoning me at the party, the ride with Eduardo and the others, Marisol pulling the emergency brake, and my decision to get out of the truck rather than leave her behind. Victor listened in silence, eyes on the road. When I finished, he just shook his head. "No good deed goes unpunished, huh?" "Seems that way," I agreed sadly. We drove in silence after that. The car's suspension had long since given up, and we bounced and rattled over every small pothole in the road. Victor didn't seem inclined to conversation, and I was too exhausted to try to force a dialogue. Instead, I rested my head against the window and watched the dark scenery slip by, grateful to be moving toward home once again. After about an hour of driving, Victor suddenly slowed down. "There's something on the road ahead," he said, squinting through the windshield. I peered through the darkness. As we drew closer, the headlights illuminated what looked like a stopped car on the shoulder of the road. But as we approached, I realized there was something else in the scene besides a broken-down car. Victor stopped about 20 meters from the scene. In the harsh glare of the headlights, I could now clearly see two bodies lying on the pavement next to the car. They were men dressed in dark clothing, motionless on the ground. Around them, spreading slowly across the black surface of the road, were dark pools that could only be blood. "My God," I whispered, an icy horror seeping into my bones. "Should we call someone?" "Stay in the car," Victor ordered, already opening his door. I wanted to protest, wanted to suggest we should call the police or an ambulance, but Victor was already walking toward the bodies. I watched frozen with shock as he approached the first man and knelt beside him. But instead of checking for a pulse or signs of life, Victor began going through the man's pockets. My brain struggled to process what I was witnessing. Victor wasn't trying to help these men, he was robbing them. I watched in horror as he took out a wallet phone and loose change, stuffing them into his pockets before moving to the second man to repeat the process. The scene was surreal, nightmarish. Steam rising from the fresh blood indicated whatever had happened here had occurred very recently, perhaps just minutes before we arrived. The violence of it was evident in the unnatural positions of the bodies and the massive amount of blood. These men hadn't died in an accident. They had been attacked brutally. I should reach for my phone call for help. I should yell at Victor to stop what he's doing and show some basic human decency. But I sat there paralyzed, watching through the windshield as this stranger who had seemed like my salvation just minutes ago violated the dead with no sign of remorse. After looting the second man's clothing, Victor moved to their car. He looked inside, then opened the door and began rummaging through the interior. I could see him taking items from the glove compartment, checking under the seats, even popping the trunk to see what he could find there. As I watched, this grim looting scene movement caught my attention. One of the men on the ground, the one farthest from our car, appeared to move slightly. His head shifted just a tiny bit, as if he were trying to turn toward us. My heart nearly stopped beating. He was still alive. I should call out, should rush to help him. But fear kept me frozen in place, my hands slick with sweat and my throat dry. What if this whole situation was some kind of trap? What if Victor was somehow involved in whatever had happened here? Or what if the injured man himself was dangerous? The wounds looked too severe, too real to be fake, but my mind raced with paranoid possibilities. Victor returned to our car after what seemed like an eternity, but was probably only 5 minutes. His pant pockets bulged with whatever he had taken from the scene. He slid back into the driver's seat without a word and started the engine. "Shouldn't we call someone?" I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "That man, I think he moved. He might still be alive." Victor shot me a sharp look. "Nobody's alive over there, and we were never here. Understand?" The threat in his voice was unmistakable. I nodded silently, too terrified to argue. As we drove away, I couldn't help but look back at the bodies. The man I thought had moved was now still, but I could swear his eyes open and empty, and death followed our car as we drove away. We continued down the highway in thick, suffocating silence. Victor drove faster now, as if eager to put distance between us and the grisly scene. I sat rigid in my seat, my mind racing with questions and fears. Who were those men? What had happened to them? And what kind of person had I accepted a ride from every light on the road? Every sound from outside the car made me jump. I kept expecting to see police lights in the rearview mirror, or worse, a car following us, someone or something connected to the men we had left behind. Victor, by contrast, seemed completely unaffected. He drove with the casual confidence of a man without a care in the world, occasionally reaching down to adjust the radio or check something in one of his work pants pockets, now filled with the dead men's possessions. I tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe Victor was just being practical. The men were clearly beyond help. Calling the police would mean hours of questioning statements, perhaps even suspicion falling on us. And what good would their wallets and phones do them now? Better they go to someone who could use them. But no matter how I tried to justify it, a deep sense of wrongness persisted. We had left men to die alone on a dark highway. We had taken what wasn't ours. There would be a price to pay for that. There had to be. After driving for another half hour or so, a strange sound began emanating from beneath the car. It started as a light scraping, barely audible over the engine, but gradually grew louder. It sounded like metal dragging on the road, accompanied by something softer that created a wet, sliding sound against the pavement. Victor initially ignored it, perhaps hoping it would stop on its own. But as the noise persisted and grew louder, he finally slowed down and pulled onto the shoulder. I remember with exact detail what happened next. Victor took a deep breath and then exhaled a heavy sigh. Without looking at me, he reached across my legs to open the glove compartment and took out a flashlight. Then he leaned in closer to open my door. "Get out and check what's dragging," he said, handing me the flashlight. It wasn't a request, it was an order. I didn't want to get out of the car. I didn't want to look under the vehicle and see what was making that horrible scraping, sliding sound. But I also didn't want to anger this man who was my only way back to the city. I took the flashlight with trembling hands and stepped out into the night. The air outside was cool and still. We were now in a remote section of the highway with no streetlights and no sign of civilization in any direction. The only light came from our headlights and the dim glow of the partial moon obscured by clouds. I knelt down beside the car and switched on the flashlight, directing the beam underneath the vehicle. At first I saw nothing unusual, just the chassis, the exhaust pipe, the dark road below. But as I moved the light toward the rear of the car, I caught something that didn't belong there. There, near the exhaust, was a dark mass stuck or attached to something under the car. I shifted position to get a better look, moving the light closer to identify what it was. What I saw made me drop the flashlight in shock. Caught under the car, somehow attached to the frame, was a pair of human legs. They were bent at an unnatural angle, pants torn and soaked with blood, shoes still on the feet. They looked as if they had been dragged along the road for miles. I stumbled backward, a scream caught in my throat. The flashlight had gone out when it hit the ground, plunging me back into almost complete darkness. For several seconds I stood motionless, unable to process what I had just seen. Victor must have grown impatient because he got out of the car and came around to where I was standing. He picked up the flashlight, turned it back on, and directed it at the spot I had been pointing to. "What is it?" he asked, his voice strangely calm. I couldn't speak. I just pointed my hand, shaking uncontrollably. Victor knelt down and looked where I was pointing. He swept the flashlight beam slowly across the underside of the car, then stood up and gave me an odd look. "There's nothing there," he said. "Just a loose piece of metal I need to tighten. That's what was making the noise." I looked at him in disbelief. But I saw there were legs, human legs, stuck under the car. Victor shook his head. "You're seeing things, kid. Too much excitement for one night, I think." He knelt down again and reached under the car, apparently tightening something. When he stood up, he handed me the flashlight. "See for yourself." With trembling hands, I took the flashlight and forced myself to look again. I directed the beam exactly where I had seen the legs before, but now there was nothing there. Just the chassis of the car, a piece of metal that Victor had apparently tightened, and the empty road beneath. I stood up slowly, my mind reeling. Had I imagined it? Could the stress and horror of the evening have pushed my mind to the breaking point? But it had seemed so real, so vivid, the legs, the torn pants, the blood. "Let's go," Victor said, already heading back to the driver's side. "We've wasted enough time." I returned to the car, still shaken by what I had, or thought I had seen. When Victor started the engine and pulled back onto the highway, I couldn't stop thinking about the two men we had left on the road. About the one who had moved, whose eyes seemed to follow our car as we drove away. The rest of the journey passed in heavy silence. Victor didn't speak, and neither did I. I just wanted to arrive safely to escape this situation and forget everything that had happened tonight. Finally, we reached the city. I asked Victor to drop me at the nearest metro station. It was well past midnight and the subway wasn't running anymore, but under the harsh white lights of the station entrance I could call a taxi. And more importantly, I would no longer be alone with Victor. Before getting out of the car, I thanked him for the ride and offered him a few bills to pay for his trouble. He declined, saying it wasn't necessary. Perhaps he had taken enough money from those men. As Victor drove away, I watched his car disappear into the night. And right at that moment, under the streetlight, I saw something that made my blood freeze in the back seat of the car, where before there had been no one, now sat another person. A dark figure sitting there, looking out through the window, eyes seeming to stare directly at me. I stood there frozen with fear until the car completely vanished from sight. Then I hurriedly called a taxi and went home, trying to convince myself that it was all just my imagination, that there had been no one sitting in the back seat of Victor's car. But deep down I knew what I had seen. And to this day I wonder who that person was. One of the two men from the road returning to claim what had been taken from him, or another soul drawn into Victor's grim journey just as I had been. One thing I know for certain, I will never hitchhike with a stranger again. And I've learned a valuable lesson: never take from the dead, for you never know which soul might follow you home. In Mexico, we have an ancient legend about los jinetes sin descanso, the riders without rest. These are the spirits of those who died violent deaths on the road, especially those who were robbed after death. They cannot rest until they reclaim what belongs to them, and they will follow the thief, haunting them like a shadow waiting for the right moment to claim justice. A few months after that incident, I saw a small news item about a man found dead in his car in a desolate area outside the city. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of foul play. Just an older man with a look of terror on his face, as if he had seen a ghost. The police never determined an official cause of death. The man's name was Victor II, Evelyn's ride. On my last day in Texas, I didn't want to walk anymore. My feet ached, my back was sore, and I had never felt so tired in my life. I once thought riding with the dead was the scariest thing until I discovered that the dead weren't the most frightening thing on that night road. All day, despite walking without rest, I hadn't managed to make much progress. Compared to previous days, today felt like I was walking in place. The sun was setting, painting soft orange rays on the desert Texas horizon, only highlighting how alone I was on this empty highway. At 7 p.m., I dragged myself into Cove Creek, a tiny town of about 10 blocks. My original plan was to continue on to Odessa tonight, but in my current state, that seemed impossible. I walked along the edge of the highway, looking for somewhere to buy food, but found nothing. After passing through the entire town in just minutes, I stopped to consider my options. I only had about 10% of the money I'd started my journey with. Not enough for a bus ride, nor enough for lodging. Just enough for dinner and maybe a hot cup of coffee. I'd been walking for 3 days trying to make it back to my mother's house after fleeing an abusive relationship. There was no option but to continue through the Texas night or wait here until morning. Neither option sounded good. I hadn't ended up here by choice. A few days earlier, I had no option but to leave everything behind. With a broken heart and several bruises hidden under my sleeves, I decided to return to my mother's, never looking back. On a cool April evening, I started this journey, never imagining it would be this difficult. As the sun sank below the horizon, darkness quickly descended. I couldn't stay in Cove Creek overnight. The town didn't even have a motel, and I couldn't risk walking all night through these isolated stretches. The stories I'd heard about what happens to women alone on dark roads made me shiver. Standing at the edge of the small town, I weighed my options. Sighing, I decided my only choice was to find someone to give me a ride. I hated having to do it, but there was no other option. I looked up when I heard a car approaching. An old dark blue sedan was coming my way. I hesitated, then stuck out my thumb, hoping they would stop. My mother had warned me never to hitchhike with strangers, but desperation won out over caution. The car slowed and came to a stop. Through the dim light, I could see a middle-aged woman driving and an elderly man sitting in the back seat. I approached the car cautiously, my backpack clutched tightly around my shoulders. "Hello," I said, trying to sound confident. "I'm trying to get to Odessa. Could you give me a ride?" The woman, about 40, with dark brown hair tied back neatly and a calm face, looked me over for a moment before nodding. "Get in," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Thank you so much." I opened the door and climbed into the back seat, sitting next to the elderly man. He didn't turn to look at me, just continued staring straight ahead. As soon as I closed the door, the woman locked all the car doors and turned off the interior light. "I'm Sarah," I said, trying to break the tense silence. "Evelyn," the woman replied. She didn't introduce the elderly man. At first, the atmosphere in the car was tense. Evelyn drove in silence, her face stern in the glow of oncoming headlights. I started telling her about my journey, explaining why I was on the road and where I was heading. I carefully omitted details about my violent ex-boyfriend, just saying I was heading back to my mother's. As I spoke, the atmosphere in the car seemed to lighten a bit. Evelyn even smiled when I told her about some of the challenges I'd faced walking for 3 days. "I work for a church in Odessa," she finally said, the first information she'd shared about herself. "I'm on my way back from a mission trip." I breathed a sigh of relief. Evelyn was a religious worker. Surely I would be safe with her. I leaned back in the seat, allowing myself to relax for the first time in hours. Perhaps my luck was finally turning. The elderly man beside me still hadn't said a word. Occasionally I glanced at him, trying to make conversation, but he just stared straight ahead, eyes wide open, face expressionless. I assumed he might be hearing impaired or have some cognitive issue, so I didn't press the matter. We drove for a while, night falling completely. The only light came from the car's headlights and occasionally from the rare cars passing by. The highway stretched before us, a black ribbon through the vast darkness of West Texas. Evelyn stopped the car at a grocery store in the next town to buy bread. I stayed in the car with the elderly man, feeling slightly uncomfortable. I was hungry but didn't want to leave the car and cause any delay. Evelyn had been kind enough to give me a ride, and I didn't want to inconvenience her. The silence from the back seat made me increasingly uneasy. In my mind, ideas and phrases to break this silence kept forming, but none escaped my lips. I wondered if the man was okay. He had been sitting motionless for an unusually long time. I turned to check on him, and what I saw made my skin crawl. The man was staring straight ahead, but not in a normal way. His eyes were open too wide, and in them a deep horror had been permanently frozen. His mouth was slightly open, not of his own volition, but as if his jaw had been broken or dislocated. His tongue and palate were black as if necrotic, and most horrifyingly, his hands were tied with a thin but sturdy rope. I couldn't cry out, but my heart pounded so hard I heard it in my ears. This man wasn't silent. He was dead or nearly dead or something worse. The car door opened and Evelyn returned. She saw me looking at the man, and a smile appeared on her face. Not a warm smile, but one that made me shiver. "Keep your eyes forward," she whispered in my ear, her voice barely audible. She started the engine, and we were back on the road. Now the atmosphere in the car was entirely different, heavy with fear and anticipation. I tried to stay calm, thinking about what I could do. I had no phone. I'd sold it days ago for travel money. I couldn't call for help, and even if I could, we were in the middle of nowhere where no one could reach me in time. We entered a very dark stretch of road. No street lights, no light from buildings, just endless darkness illuminated by the car's headlights. Evelyn slowed down and stopped under a single tree growing beside the highway. She didn't turn on the hazard lights, turned off the headlights, and killed the engine. Darkness enveloped us. My heart raced so fast I thought it would burst from my chest. My mouth was full of saliva, and I felt nauseated. My knees went numb, and I felt dizzy. Within a minute I had resigned myself to my fate, believing I would be the victim of an attack. Evelyn's face suddenly appeared as my eyes adjusted to the darkness. She could tell I was terrified. She reached out and caressed my shoulder, a gesture that in any other circumstance might have been considered comforting. "Don't be afraid," she said. "God put you in my path." I tried to say something, but no words came out. "It's just that God can't see us right now," she added with a horrible whisper. She pointed forward where darkness had swallowed all traces of the road. She turned on the headlights, and they instantly revealed the road ahead of us. But not just the road. Standing in the middle of the lane was a humanoid figure, a dark, tall, slender shadow. When the headlights illuminated it, the shadow moved with impossible speed, disappearing to the side of the road and vanishing into the darkness. Evelyn started the car and floored the accelerator. The old, heavy car gained speed, and we shot forward. But at a sharp curve, the car skidded. The elderly man's body swayed to the left, and his head smashed against the window. The sound his head made as it hit the glass startled me. It sounded like a melon being cracked open, and then the impossible happened. The elderly man, whom I was certain was dead, suddenly moved. He sat upright as if pulled by an invisible string. He moved forward, head thrust into the space between the front seats. I could feel his breath on my shoulder, cold and damp, like air from an open grave. At the same time, Evelyn said, "Don't be afraid, he likes girls like you." Survival instinct took over. Without thinking, I opened the car door and jumped out even though the car was moving. I fell into a water-filled ditch full of mud which somewhat cushioned my impact. Hurt but alive, I lay in the mud watching the car stop ahead. The car's lights went out, making the road around me disappear. However, a distant light post outlined the car's silhouette. I lay still, not daring to move, not daring to breathe loudly. After a while, Evelyn turned on the interior light, and I could see two figures inside Evelyn and the elderly man. The man barely moved, but Evelyn seemed to be frantically searching for something in the glove compartment. One of the car doors opened, and I saw the elderly man step out. Rather than moving slowly as I expected, he ran at an impossible speed and vanished into the darkness. Evelyn started the car and drove away, the vehicle gradually dissolving into the horizon. In my condition, I couldn't continue walking, and I certainly couldn't get into anyone's car. Additionally, I didn't want to stand up because even though the car had left that stretch of road, I still felt that something or someone was out there searching, lurking, hiding. I lay in the ditch for hours, not daring to move. My entire body trembled, partly from cold, partly from fear. The images from inside the car, the man's dead eyes, Evelyn's demonic smile, the shadow on the road, all played in my mind like a horror movie. Occasionally cars passed by, headlights sweeping through the darkness, but I remained still. I didn't dare stand up and signal, afraid that one of those cars might be Evelyn's returning to find me. Every sound in the night, insects, wind rustling through the tall grass. Distant cars made my heart race faster. I was certain that at any moment the elderly man or the shadow from the middle of the road would emerge from the darkness and find me. I tried to make sense of what had happened, searching for meaning in this nightmare. Evelyn said she worked for a church, but I couldn't imagine any religious organization condoning what I had just witnessed. The man in the car, was he dead yet? Was he victim or accomplice? And the shadow on the road, what was it? A person, a creature, or just my imagination? The night slowly passed, and the sun began to rise in the east. The first light of dawn gave me a bit of courage. I slowly sat up, my body aching from lying on the cold ground all night. My clothes were soaked and muddy, but I was still alive, something I hadn't been certain of just hours ago. I looked around, trying to orient myself. In the daylight, this stretch of highway didn't seem as frightening as it had at night. I saw a gas station in the distance, perhaps a mile or two away. I decided to walk there, hoping to find someone who could help me. As I began walking, a pickup truck slowed beside me. My first instinct was to run, but when I looked up, I saw a middle-aged couple with genuinely concerned faces. "Are you okay?" the woman asked, lowering her window. "Do you need help?" I hesitated. After what had happened, I wasn't sure if I could trust anyone anymore, but something in the woman's eyes, warmth, genuine concern, convinced me. "Yes," I said, my voice hoarse from disuse. "I got into trouble last night." They invited me into their truck and took me to their home, a small farm not far away. The woman, Lisa, let me use their bathroom, gave me clean clothes, and invited me to breakfast. Her husband, John, called the local police to report what had happened. During breakfast, I told them the whole story about Evelyn, the elderly man, and the shadow on the road. Lisa and John listened attentively, not interrupting. When I finished, they exchanged worried glances. "Do you remember what the car looked like?" John asked. "Or the license plate?" I shook my head. "It was an old sedan, maybe blue or black, hard to tell in the darkness. I don't remember the license plate." Lisa placed her hand on mine. "The important thing is, you're safe. Many people aren't so lucky." Something in the way they spoke, the way they looked at each other, made me think they knew more than they were saying. "You know something, don't you?" I asked. "You know who Evelyn is," John sighed. "We're not sure, but there are stories, rumors about this highway, especially that stretch of road you went through." "What kind of stories?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. "Stories about a woman and an elderly man," Lisa said quietly. "They pick up hitchhikers, and those hitchhikers disappear." "But those are just stories," John quickly added, perhaps noticing the horror on my face. "No one's proven anything." "The most important thing is that you got away," Lisa said. "You're one of the lucky ones." I didn't feel lucky. I felt like I had escaped a nightmare only to discover it might be real. But I nodded and tried to smile, grateful for their help. After breakfast, John offered to drive me to the nearest bus station so I could continue my journey to Odessa. I accepted his offer, grateful not to have to walk or hitchhike anymore. As we were preparing to leave, Lisa pulled me aside. "There's one more thing I think you should know," she said quietly. "The stories about the woman and the elderly man, they first appeared over 50 years ago. I looked at her, not sure I understood her meaning. What do you mean? If the stories are true, Lisa said, then that woman would be over 90 years old now. But from what you described, Evelyn was only about 40. I felt another chill run down my spine. Maybe it's her daughter or someone else with a similar story? Lisa nodded, but her eyes said she didn't believe that, and neither did I. According to local lore in 1964, Evelyn Sullivan and her husband Robert were members of a small cult in Midland. Lisa said, her voice dropping to a whisper. They worshipped something they called the Watcher on the Road. The cult believed that if they provided traveling souls to this entity, they would be granted immortality. The police found their car on the highway, the same stretch of road you went through last night. Door open, blood in the back seat, but no bodies. Initially, they thought Evelyn and Robert had been attacked, but then hitchhikers started disappearing. Always on that stretch of road, always at midnight. In the 70s, the police thought they caught the culprit, a serial killer who confessed to killing 7 hitchhikers. The disappearances stopped, and the story of Evelyn and Robert was gradually forgotten. Until recently. What do you mean? I asked, my voice shaking. In the past 3 years, 12 people have disappeared on that stretch of road. All hitchhikers, all around midnight. And the rare witnesses like you all describe a middle-aged woman and an elderly man. But that's impossible, I stammered. There are many things in this world we don't understand, Lisa said gently. Just know that you were very lucky. I reached Odessa later that day, still shaken by Lisa's story. I checked into a cheap hotel, needing a safe place to rest, before continuing to my mother's house the next day. After showering and changing into the clean clothes Lisa had given me, I sat on the bed trying to sort through my thoughts. Deep in the night, a soft knock on the window woke me. My hotel room was on the ground floor, and the window faced the parking lot. I froze, not daring to move. The knocking repeated, and I found myself slowly turning my head toward the window. A face was looking in, dimly illuminated by the streetlight. It was Evelyn's face. She smiled when she saw me looking, and raised one hand, waving as if we were old friends. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. As I watched, Evelyn tilted her head to one side and her face began to change. Her skin turned ashen, her eyes sank deep into their sockets, and her smile widened, too wide for a human face. Beside her, another face appeared, the face of the elderly man. But now there was no horror in his eyes anymore. Instead, there was a hunger and insatiable appetite. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer. When I opened my eyes again, they were gone. But the problem was I wasn't sure if they had really been there at all. The next morning, I left the hotel as early as possible. I never completed the journey to my mother's house. Instead, I headed west, as far away from Texas and that highway as possible. Sometimes I still dream of them, Evelyn with her demonic smile, the elderly man with his dead eyes, and the shadow standing in the middle of the highway. In those dreams, they're always searching for me, and I'm always running away. And sometimes when I drive at night and look in my rearview mirror, I think I see an old sedan following me with a woman and an elderly man inside their eyes, reflecting my taillights, like the eyes of predators in the night. I don't know what they are, cursed souls, demons, or the Watcher that Lisa mentioned. But I know they're still out there on the dark roads of Texas looking for new souls to sacrifice. So if you're driving through West Texas at midnight and you see a middle-aged woman with an elderly man standing by the road, please don't stop. Don't let your compassion override your caution. Just keep driving, because not all the dead stay in their graves, and not all those who give rides want to take you safely home. There's a reason why the stretch of road from Cove Creek to Odessa has the highest rate of missing persons in Texas. Locals call it the Watcher's Highway. And if you're brave enough to check the records of the local police department, you'll find a strange pattern. The missing people only disappear in even-numbered years, always on the 13th day of the month, and always after being last seen with a woman matching the description of Evelyn Sullivan, who died in 1964. Remember, on the highway, Not all the dead lie down. Some are still driving, and they're always looking for more passengers. 3. The shapeshifter. I never believed in monsters until a monster saved my life from the real monsters, humans. I still vividly recall the burning sensation of that hot coffee on my tongue. It created an immediate reflex, making me pull my hand back and accidentally spill some coffee onto the back of my hand. The burning sensation spread from the tip of my tongue down my throat and to the back of my hand, forcing me to quickly slow down and find a place to stop. It was a late October afternoon, and I was driving alone on the Cuernavaca highway. It was only 6 p.m., but darkness had already begun to fall, the last rays of sunset painting orange and purple streaks across the western sky. I had been driving for about 3 hours straight, trying to reach Mexico City before midnight. Fatigue was starting to creep into my body, and the coffee I had just purchased at the last rest stop was my only lifeline to staying alert. My old Volkswagen glided smoothly on the empty highway. The only sounds were the engine and the soft radio reporting on a storm approaching the coast. This stretch of road was desolate during the day, and at night it became one of the most dangerous sections in Mexico. Most drivers tried to avoid traveling through here after dark due to stories of highway robberies and unreported accidents. As I raised the cup to my lips, I'd forgotten that the coffee was still too hot. The moment the liquid touched my tongue, I quickly removed the cup from my lips. But in the process, some coffee spilled out, landing on the back of my hand that was gripping the steering wheel. By reflex, I let off the gas and gently pressed the brake, gradually slowing down. I hadn't intended to stop completely, just to slow down enough to place the coffee cup in the holder, wipe my hand clean, and take a sip of cold water from the bottle beside me to soothe the burning sensation. But as the car slowed, I noticed 2 figures by the side of the road. In the fading light, I didn't recognize them immediately. But as the car almost came to a complete stop, I realized it was a child, perhaps around 12 years old, and an older man. They were sitting on a rock by the roadside, seemingly waiting for someone. The child looked thin and underdressed for the cooling evening, wearing only a thin shirt and vest. The man sat with his head bowed, shoulders slumped, as if carrying the weight of the world. I hadn't intended to stop to help. This stretch of road was notoriously dangerous, and my mother had always warned me never to stop for strangers, especially at night. But as I was about to continue driving, the child suddenly looked up, and our eyes met. There was something in the child's eyes, a silent desperation, an unspoken pain that touched something deep within me. Before I realized it, I had lowered my window. "Is everything okay? Can I help you with something?" I asked, keeping one hand on the steering wheel, ready to drive away if necessary. The child stood up and walked toward my car. Now that I could see better, I realized it was a boy. His black hair was disheveled and dirty, as if he hadn't bathed in days. "Please, senor," the boy said, his voice soft as a whisper. "We need to get to the next village. He's sick." I glanced at the man, still sitting on the rock, motionless. Even from this distance, I could see he was trembling slightly, though the weather wasn't particularly cold. "What happened?" I asked, feeling concerned. "Does he need to go to a hospital?" "Not a hospital," the boy said quickly. "He needs special medicine. There's a doctor in the next village who can help." I hesitated. Stopping for strangers on this road after dark was something we were all taught never to do. But how could I drive away, leaving a child and a sick man on a deserted highway, when the temperature would continue to drop throughout the night? "How far is the next village?" I asked. "Not far, senor. About 20 minutes by car." I checked my watch. If it only took 20 minutes to get them to safety, I could still make it to Mexico City before midnight. And if the man truly needed medicine... "All right," I said, making my decision. "Get in." The boy nodded gratefully and went back to help the man stand up. I watched through the rear-view mirror as they approached the car. The man moved painfully, each step seeming to be a great effort. Now I could see he was older than I initially thought, perhaps in his 60s, with the sun-darkened skin typical of highland Mexican farmers. The boy opened the passenger door and got in while the man slowly, painfully climbed into the back seat. Once they were settled, I started to pull back onto the highway. "Thank you so much, senor," the boy said. "I'm Lucas and this is Don Tomas." "Nice to meet you," I replied. "I'm Gabriel, so what's wrong with him?" Lucas didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked out the window as if considering his answer. "It's an old illness," he finally said. "It comes back sometimes. The doctor in the next village can help." There was something in the way he said it, a hesitation, a small lie that made me suspicious. But I didn't press. It wasn't my business. Behind me, Don Tomas began making small sounds, almost like moans. I looked in the rearview mirror but couldn't see his face in the darkness. "Is he going to be okay?" I asked, genuinely worried now. That sound didn't seem like that of a normally sick person. It was deep and growling, almost animal. "He'll be fine when we get there," Lucas assured me, but his voice was tense. We drove in silence for about 20 minutes. Darkness had fully descended, and there were no other cars on the road. Just us, the headlights cutting through the darkness and the black mountains looming on either side. I began to wonder if I had made the right decision. Perhaps Lucas had lied about the distance. Perhaps Don Tomas wasn't really sick. Perhaps this was a trap and they would rob me when we turned onto the next deserted side road. But then I noticed something about Lucas. He was keeping his right hand inside his vest, hiding it from my view. I wasn't sure why I hadn't noticed this earlier. "What's wrong with your hand?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Lucas started, clearly surprised that I had noticed. "Nothing, senor," he said, but he couldn't hide the pain in his voice. "Let me see," I insisted, genuinely concerned now. "If you're hurt, we should go to a hospital, not a village." Lucas hesitated, then slowly pulled his hand out from his vest. Even in the dim light of the dashboard, I could see it was a gruesome sight. His hand was wrapped in a yellowish cloth, probably torn from his shirt. The cloth had a large, dark red stain, a lot of blood. But the worst part was the shape of the hand beneath the cloth. It looked wrong, missing 2 or 3 fingers. "My God," I gasped, nearly swerving off the road in shock. "You need to go to a hospital right now." "No," Lucas said, his voice suddenly hard. "We need to go to the village. The doctor there can help me." "But you're losing blood," I protested. And your fingers." "Please, senor," Lucas pleaded, "just take us to the village. That's where we need to go." I didn't know what to do. On one side was my instinct to take this injured child to the nearest emergency room. On the other was his plea to take them to this mysterious village. I decided to continue driving for a while, but if the village didn't appear soon, I would turn off at the next exit and find a hospital. I turned on the interior light so I could see Lucas's wound better and assess Don Tomas's condition. But the moment I reached for the switch, Lucas grabbed my arm, stopping me. "No," he said, his voice urgent. "Don't turn on the light. Please." There was something in his voice, a real fear and urgency, that made me stop. I looked into his eyes and saw a deep fear I didn't understand. "Okay," I said, slowly lowering my hand. "It's fine. We'll continue in the dark." "Thank you," Lucas whispered, clearly relieved. I continued driving, but my concerns were growing. This was a strange situation, and I was beginning to wonder what I had gotten myself into. I noticed Lucas hadn't put on his seatbelt. "Put on your seatbelt, Lucas," I said. "This road has many curves." Lucas nodded and tried to reach for the seatbelt, but was clearly having difficulty with only one functioning hand. I wanted to help, but I needed to keep my hands on the wheel. "Let me help," I said, preparing to pull over. "It's not necessary," Lucas said quickly, finally managing to pull the seatbelt across himself and click it into place. "I can do it." The moaning from Don Tomas was growing louder, turning into a low growl. It was really starting to worry me. "He's not well," I said. "We should stop and check on him." "No!" Lucas almost shouted, then quickly lowered his voice. I'm sorry, senor, but we can't stop. Not now. We're almost there." I looked in the rearview mirror, trying to see Don Tomas, but the darkness was too thick. I could only see the vague outline of him sitting motionless in the seat. "Lucas, what's going on?" I asked, my voice serious. "You're hiding something. Tell me the truth." Lucas was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was very quiet, almost inaudible over the engine. "You wouldn't understand, senor. No one understands." "Try me," I said. "Whatever is happening, I just want to help." Lucas turned to look at me, and in the dim light from the dashboard, I could see tears in his eyes. "He's not my father," he said, his voice trembling. "He's my uncle, but that's not the important thing." "Then what is?" I asked, feeling my heart beat faster, though I wasn't sure why. Lucas looked into the darkness ahead for a long time before turning back to me, and then with a clarity that was frightening, he said, "Don't you see he's not even human?" The boy's words froze me in place. In that moment, time seemed to stand still. I stared at Lucas, trying to comprehend the meaning of what he had just said. Not human. Was that a joke, or was the child speaking metaphorically that the man was too cruel, too evil to be considered human? "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice hoarse. But before Lucas could answer, a fierce growl erupted from the back seat, so loud that I jumped, nearly swerving off the road. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw no longer a man. In the back seat of my car now was a large creature with thick black fur, gleaming eyes reflecting the light from the dashboard like two rubies in the darkness. It had the shape of a massive dog, or perhaps a wolf, but much larger than any species I had ever seen. Long, sharp fangs glistened as it opened its mouth, and another growl emerged, filling the small space of the car. I screamed in fear, hitting the brakes so hard that the car skidded on the road. Instinct told me that I needed to get out of the car, away from this monster, as quickly as possible. But as I reached for the door, Lucas raised his injured hand in a stopping gesture. "Don't be afraid," he said, his voice strangely calm. "He won't hurt you. He's just eaten." Those words, rather than comforting me, only increased my fear. Just eaten. Looking at Lucas's mutilated hand, I felt a new horror rise within me. "What?" I stammered. "What is this? What the hell is going on?" Lucas looked at me with an almost pitying expression. "It's a nahual," he said, as if explaining something obvious. "A shapeshifter. Haven't you ever heard of them?" Of course I had heard of the legend stories of witches and shamans who could transform into animals. But those were just stories, myths told around campfires to scare children. Not something real, not something sitting in the back seat of my car right now. "Please," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite my entire body trembling. "Please let me out of the car. You don't understand," Lucas said, his voice urgent. "We're helping you. The bad men, they're blocking the road up ahead. They would have killed you and taken your car." "What?" I looked at Lucas, unsure if I could believe anything he said. "How do you know?" "Because we saw them," Lucas replied. "They've already killed 3 others tonight. But then—" He glanced back at the beast in the back seat. "Then he found them." I didn't know what to say. Part of me still wanted to run to escape this insane situation, but another part, the part that listened to survival instinct, was telling me that perhaps Lucas was telling the truth. Perhaps there was a greater danger waiting ahead, a danger that this beast, however terrifying, had saved me from. "If that's true," I said, trying to think rationally despite the completely irrational situation, "then why did you stop me? Why not let me take another road?" "There is no other road around here," Lucas said, "and he needs help. He can't stay long in this form. It's painful for him. He needs to see El Maestro in the next town." El Maestro, a curandero, a traditional healer, or some other kind of shaman, someone who knew about nahuales and such creatures. "Who is El Maestro?" I asked, trying to understand better. "The only one who can help him return to human form," Lucas explained. "He's been stuck too long in this shape. It's killing him." I looked in the rearview mirror again. The beast, the nahual, was watching me intently with its strange eyes. The ferocity was gone, replaced by what seemed almost like a plea. "What about your hand?" I asked, still suspicious. "What did it do to your hand?" Lucas looked down at his injured hand. This wasn't him. he said quietly. "This was those men, the robbers. They caught me in the last town. They thought I had money. When I said I didn't, they—" He trailed off, unable to continue. "They cut off your fingers?" I asked, feeling nauseated. Lucas nodded, tears beginning to stream down his cheeks. He heard me screaming. He saved me. I looked back at the narwhal in the mirror. If Lucas was telling the truth, then this creature wasn't a monster. It had saved an innocent child from torturers. But how could I be sure? How did I know this wasn't some elaborate trap? How can I trust you? I asked. Lucas looked me straight in the eye. You don't have to trust us. But when we reach the next curve, you'll see we're telling the truth. I wondered whether I should believe what Lucas said. A part of me, the rational and educated part, knew that Nahualas didn't exist. They were just stories, legends from ancient times. But how could I deny what my eyes were seeing? The massive beast in the back seat wasn't a hallucination. It was real, breathing and watching me with an intelligence that was too human. "All right," I finally said. "I'll take you to the next town. But if this is a trap—" "It's not a trap," Lucas said quickly. "I promise." I slowly released the brake and let the car start moving again. The atmosphere in the car was still tense, but something had changed. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with curiosity and perhaps just maybe a bit of understanding. We drove in silence for another few minutes. Lucas sat straighter now, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, tense and alert. The narwhal in the back seat had gone quiet, but I could still feel its powerful presence like a silent fire burning in the back of my car. As we approached a wide curve, Lucas suddenly sat up straight. "Here it is," he whispered. "You'll see now." I slowed down as we approached the curve, my headlights sweeping across the road ahead. At first I didn't see anything unusual. But as we rounded the curve completely, my headlights illuminated a scene that made me stop the car immediately. On the road, there were wooden planks placed across a makeshift barricade designed to force cars to stop. And beside that barricade were 3 bodies lying motionless on the road, their blood forming dark pools beneath them in the headlights. "My God!" I gasped, horrified at the scene. "Those are the men who did this to me," Lucas said quietly, raising his injured hand. "They would have done the same to anyone driving through here tonight." I stared hard at the bodies. They were all men dressed in dark clothing and weapons, a machete, and 2 guns lay scattered beside them. But what made me shudder wasn't the weapons or the blood, it was the manner of their death. Their bodies had been torn apart by deep and powerful bites, as if they had been attacked by a massive wild animal. I looked in the rearview mirror, staring at the narwhal. It looked back at me, unapologetic but also not threatening. This was what it had done. It had killed these men, perhaps to protect Lucas, perhaps to prevent them from harming others. It had acted according to the instincts of a creature that was both human and beast, protecting the weak, punishing the wicked. "Should we call the police?" I asked, unsure what to do with this scene. Lucas shook his head. "No one would believe us, and even if they did, they would hunt him down." He pointed toward the narwhal. "He only did what was necessary. These men, they have killed many innocent people." I didn't know what to say. Part of me knew that I should report this 3 people were dead, no matter how guilty they might have been. But another part understood the primal logic of what had happened here. In these remote areas, justice sometimes doesn't come from courts and police, but from older, more fundamental laws. "Can we go on?" Lucas asked, his voice soft. "He's in pain. He needs to see El Maestro." I nodded and carefully drove around the barricade and the bodies. As we continued our journey, I noticed that Lucas seemed more comfortable now, as if a burden had been lifted from his shoulders, the burden of uncertainty about whether I would believe him or not. "Lucas," I said after a while, how did Don Tomas become like this?" Lucas was silent for a moment, as if considering whether he should tell me or not. Finally he sighed. "Don Tomas is a curandero, a healer. He learned how to shapeshift from his own maestro. But something went wrong. A ritual didn't go right. He's caught between two worlds, not fully human, not fully animal. Each time he transforms, it becomes harder for him to return to human form. So El Maestro in the next town can help him, I asked. Lucas nodded. El Maestro is the only one strong enough. He understands about Nahuales and the ancient rituals. If anyone can help Don Tomas, it's El Maestro. We continued driving in silence for a bit longer. I was trying to comprehend all of this Nahuales, El Maestro, ancient rituals. It was like a whole different world opening up before me, a world that existed parallel to the modern one I knew hidden in the shadows of remote roads and small towns. "Aren't you afraid of him?" I finally asked, looking at Lucas. After seeing what he can do, Lucas looked straight ahead, a strange maturity on his young face. "Am I afraid? Yes, at first," he admitted. "But then I understood. Don Tomas only does what is necessary to protect the innocent. He never hurts good people." "How do you know who's good and who's bad?" I asked. Lucas turned to look at me, his eyes bright in the darkness. "Don Tomas knows. He can smell goodness and evil just like we can smell perfume and stench. That's why he didn't hurt you. He knew you were a good person." I looked in the rearview mirror once more. The narwhal was watching me, its eyes seeming to understand more than what an animal should. And perhaps that was the point. Don Tomas wasn't an animal. He was a human in the body of a beast, carrying the intelligence and morality of a human, but also the strength and instincts of an animal. As we approached the town, I could see the distant lights. Lucas sat up straight, a relief evident on his face. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for believing us." "I'm not sure I fully believe in all of this," I admitted. "But I know what I've seen." When we reached the edge of the town, Lucas pointed to a small house standing apart, away from the other houses. "That's El Maestro's house," he said. "You can stop the car here." I stopped the car and turned off the engine. Lucas opened the door and stepped out. The narwhal leaped through the window, a surprisingly agile movement for such a large creature. When both stood outside the car, Lucas turned back to look at me. "You should go now," he said. "And don't ever stop for someone on that stretch of road at night. Not everyone is as lucky as you." I nodded, understanding his meaning. "What about your hand? It needs care." Lucas looked down at his injured hand. "El Maestro will heal it. He can heal many things." I nodded again and started the car. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror to see Lucas and Don Tomas walking toward the small house. Just as they approached, the door opened, and a tall, thin man stood in the doorway. He seemed to have been waiting for them. I continued driving, but my mind remained with my two strange passengers and what I had witnessed tonight. Nahuales, curanderos, ancient rituals, all things that I had considered myths, but now had become all too real. As I continued my journey, I realized that I no longer felt tired. The adrenaline from the experience had awakened my mind. I took a sip of the coffee, long since cold, and wondered if I should tell anyone about what had happened. Probably not, I decided. Who would believe me? They would think I had fallen asleep at the wheel and dreamed it all. Or worse, they would think I had gone mad. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew that somewhere out there on the dark roads of Mexico there were beings that existed between two worlds, not fully human, not fully animal. And sometimes when the darkness grows too thick and evil lurks on deserted highways, these beings are the only ones who can protect the innocent. A few kilometers later, I saw another makeshift barricade on the road, not set up by robbers this time, but by the police. I slowed down and stopped when an officer waved me to pull over. "Buenas noches, señor," the officer said as he approached my window. "Have you seen anything unusual on the road? We've had reports of highway robbers operating in this area." I thought about the 3 bodies on the highway, about the Nahual, and about Lucas with his mutilated hand. I thought about justice in its most primal form and about creatures that walk between two worlds. "No, officer," I said. "I haven't seen anything at all." The officer nodded and waved me through. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time, half expecting to see a large wolf watching me from the darkness. But there was nothing there, just the dark highway stretching out behind me. However, from that night on, I never looked at darkness the same way again, because now I know that there are creatures moving within it, creatures that are neither fully human nor fully animal. And sometimes when I drive alone on deserted highways, I think I see a large wolf running parallel to my car, gleaming eyes watching, guarding me from the dangers lurking in the darkness. In Mexican culture, stories of nahuales have existed since Aztec times. Some people believe that certain special humans can shapeshift, usually into wolves or jaguars, and move between the human world and the animal world. Most legends describe nahuales as evil creatures using their abilities to harm others. But there are other stories, less known ones, about protective nahuales who use their powers to guard and protect the vulnerable, the guardianes de caminos, road guardians as the locals call them. According to local police records, highway robberies on that particular stretch of the Cuernavaca Highway have decreased by 70% in the past year. Authorities attribute this to increased police presence, but the locals know better. They tell stories of an unusually large wolf seen running along the highway in the late hours of the night, and since it appeared, those with evil intentions seem to disappear without a trace. So, if you ever drive through the Mexican highlands at night and see a boy and an older man standing by the road, remember my story. But more importantly, remember this: not all monsters are to be feared, and not all humans are good. And sometimes the things we fear most are the very things protecting us from the real dangers. 4. From Oaxaca to Nochixtlan. I once didn't believe in time loops until I got trapped in one on the highway between Oaxaca and Nochixtlan. I left Oaxaca at 6:30 p.m., confident that someone would give me a ride, a truck or car, heading to Nochixtlan, where I had reserved a room for the night. I'd spent a wonderful day exploring ancient ruins, but now the sun was setting, and I needed to reach my destination before complete darkness fell. Carrying my backpack filled with handcrafts I'd purchased from local artisans, I began walking along the highway, occasionally sticking out my thumb whenever a car passed by. After about 40 minutes of walking, I started to worry. I hadn't made it as far as I'd hoped, and my luck didn't seem to be very good this evening. Hot air rose from the asphalt, and the final rays of sunlight were almost painful as they reflected into my eyes. Sweat ran down my back, and my legs began to ache after a full day of walking. I counted 100 steps, then looked for a tree trunk or rock to lean against, resting for 60 seconds, wiping away sweat, taking a sip of water, and continuing my journey. I did this 3 or 4 times, but progress remained slow. The sun had nearly disappeared below the horizon, and I began to worry about walking in the dark. Contrary to what I'd expected, only a few cars passed by, and all were driving too fast to notice me waving. I started remembering local stories about lost wanderers on this road, people who walk forever trapped between two towns, never reaching their destination. I didn't believe in those stories, but they still made me shiver. When I had almost given up and was considering sleeping by the roadside, I stopped to rest once more. Sitting down on a dry log lying beside the road, I drank the last of my water. The log sat next to another dead tree, still standing with a large hole in its trunk. I placed my empty water bottle and the bandana I'd been using to wipe sweat into the tree hole, thinking I'd retrieved them after resting. Just as I was about to stand up, I saw headlights appearing in the distance. As the light approached, I saw it was a white pickup truck driving slowly, and amazingly, it had its turn signal on, as if intending to stop. Not wanting to miss my chance, I quickly stood up and walked toward the truck, forgetting my water bottle and bandana. The pickup stopped about 100 meters from me. The sun had almost completely disappeared, and darkness was quickly descending. This was probably my last chance to reach Nochixtlan tonight. A man, the only person in the truck, had gotten out and was checking the truck bed. He bent down to look at the rear tires, seemingly checking something. When I approached, he was preparing to get back into the truck. "Hello?" I called, giving a thumbs-up sign. "Are you heading to Nochixtlan? I've been walking from Oaxaca. Need a ride?" The man studied me carefully. He was around 50 years old, with sun-weathered skin and the calloused hands of someone who worked with them. Without saying a word, he just nodded and gestured toward the back of the truck. I glanced into the cabin. The passenger seat was empty, and for a moment I considered asking if I could sit there. But something in the man's gaze, a stern quietness, made me think he wanted me to ride in the truck bed. Not wanting to offend my benefactor, I climbed into the back without asking. As soon as I settled in, the driver started the engine and we were on our way. I lay down, using my backpack as a pillow, and looked up at the darkening sky. Exhaustion from a long day, combined with the rhythmic motion of the truck, quickly lulled me towards sleep. My original intention was just to rest, but not sleep, so I could alert the driver when we reached Nochixtlan. From where we started, the journey would only take about an hour, but my tired body had other plans and I drifted into a deep sleep. Just before waking, I had a lucid dream. In the dream, I became aware that I was sleeping in the back of a stranger's truck. That sudden realization scared me a little and jolted me awake. When I opened my eyes, I was disoriented. The sky above was completely dark, studded with thousands of stars. To my left, a crescent moon hung low. I sat up quickly, wondering how long I'd been asleep. It seemed much later than it should be. I looked around, trying to get my bearings. We were still on the highway, but I didn't recognize where we were. There were no signs, no landmarks I could identify, just the dark ribbon of road stretching ahead and behind, bordered by the silhouettes of mountains. Something felt wrong. Even accounting for my nap, we should have reached Nochixtlan by now. The journey from Oaxaca was only about an hour by car, and judging by the position of the moon, I'd been asleep for at least 2 hours, maybe more. I knocked on the rear window of the truck to get the driver's attention. He didn't respond. I knocked harder, but still nothing. Either he couldn't hear me over the engine noise, or he was ignoring me. A sense of unease began to creep over me. Where was he taking me? Had we passed Nochixtlan without stopping? Was he deliberately taking me somewhere else? Just as these unsettling thoughts were forming, the truck began to slow down. We weren't near any town or settlement that I could see, just a particularly dark stretch of road with dense trees on either side. The truck came to a complete stop and the driver turned off the engine. My heart began to race. Was this a robbery? Was I about to be attacked? I quickly checked my pockets, making sure my wallet and phone were still secure, and prepared to defend myself if necessary. The driver's door opened and the man stepped out. Without looking at me, he walked around to the back of the truck. In the dim moonlight, I could barely make out his expression, but his body language seemed stiff, almost mechanical. "Is something wrong with the truck?" I asked, trying to sound calm despite my growing anxiety. He didn't answer. Instead, he stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment before finally speaking. "This is as far as I can take you," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. I looked around at the complete darkness surrounding us. "But we're in the middle of nowhere. Where are we?" He didn't answer my question. "You need to get out now. Can you at least tell me how far we are from Nochixtlan?" I asked, reluctantly gathering my backpack. "Or is there another town nearby?" Again, no response. He just stood there, waiting for me to get out of the truck. With no other option, I climbed down from the truck bed, keeping a careful distance from the driver. As soon as my feet touched the ground, he walked back to the driver's door without another word. "Thank you for the ride," I called after him, trying to maintain some civility despite the strangeness of the situation. He got into the truck, started the engine, and drove away, leaving me standing alone on the dark highway. I watched his taillights disappear into the darkness, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Standing there in the complete darkness, I tried to decide what to do. I had no idea where I was or how far I'd have to walk to reach civilization. My phone showed no signal and the battery was down to 15%. The flashlight app would drain it quickly, so I'd have to use it sparingly. I decided to continue walking in the direction we had been heading. Sooner or later, I had to reach a town, a gas station, or at least a road sign that could tell me where I was. I turned on the phone's flashlight just long enough to make sure there were no immediate hazards on the road, then turned it off to conserve battery. The night was eerily quiet. No cars passed by, no lights appeared in the distance. Not even the sound of wildlife broke the silence. Just the crunch of my footsteps on the asphalt and my own breathing. The moon provided just enough light to see the road directly in front of me, but the surrounding landscape was hidden in darkness. After walking for what felt like hours, I began to wonder if I was even going in the right direction. Without landmarks or signs, I could be walking away from civilization rather than toward it, but turning back seemed pointless. I had no idea how far I'd come or how far I still had to go in either direction. Exhaustion was setting in again. My legs ached and my back was sore from carrying the backpack. I decided to rest for a few minutes before continuing. Finding a relatively flat area just off the road, I sat down and leaned against my backpack. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I was awakened by the sound of an approaching vehicle. Jumping to my feet, I moved back to the road, ready to flag down whoever was coming. Headlights appeared in the distance, growing brighter as the vehicle approached. I waved my arms frantically, praying they would stop. To my immense relief, the vehicle, a pickup truck, slowed down as it neared me. As the truck came to a stop beside me, a chill ran through my body. It was a white pickup truck, exactly like the one that had left me here. And when the driver's window rolled down, I found myself looking at the same weathered face of the man who had abandoned me hours earlier. "Need a ride?" he asked, as if we had never met before. I stood frozen, unable to comprehend what was happening. Was this some kind of joke? Had he circled back to find me? Or was this an identical truck with a driver who looked remarkably similar? "You," I stammered. "You're the same driver who left me here." The man frowned, looking genuinely confused. "I just came from Oaxaca. Never seen you before in my life." "But you look exactly like—" I trailed off, doubting myself now. It was dark, after all. Maybe I was mistaken. "You getting in or not?" he asked impatiently. "Not safe to be out here at night." Despite my misgivings, I didn't have many options. I needed to get to a town, and this might be my only chance for hours. "Where are you headed?" I asked cautiously. "Nochixtlan," he replied. That was my original destination. Against my better judgment, I nodded. "I'm going there too." "Get in the back," he said, gesturing to the truck bed. A sense of déjà vu washed over me as I climbed into the back of the truck. This was exactly how my evening had started hours ago. I tried to reassure myself that it was just a coincidence, another local farmer with a similar truck giving rides to travelers. As we drove, I kept alert, watching the road and trying to identify any landmarks. But in the darkness, everything looked the same. The same winding road, the same silhouetted mountains, the same star-filled sky. After about 30 minutes of driving, the truck began to slow down. My heart sank as I realized we were stopping in another deserted stretch of road far from any town or settlement. "No, not again," I muttered as the truck came to a complete stop. The driver got out and walked to the back of the truck. In the moonlight, I could see his expressionless face as he looked up at me. "This is as far as I can take you," he said in the exact same tone as before. "But we're still in the middle of nowhere," I protested. "You said you were going to Nochixtlan." He just stared at me, waiting for me to get out. "Is this some kind of joke?" I demanded, anger replacing my fear. "Why did you pick me up just to leave me stranded again?" No response, just that empty stare. With no other choice, I climbed down from the truck, keeping a wary eye on the driver. As soon as I was off the truck, he returned to the driver's seat without a word. "What's going on?" I called after him. "Why are you doing this?" He didn't answer. The truck started up and he drove away, leaving me alone in the darkness once more. I stood there watching the tail lights fade into the distance. But this time something strange happened. Instead of growing smaller as they moved away, the lights simply disappeared. Not gradually as they would if the truck had gone around a bend or over a hill. They vanished suddenly as if the truck itself had ceased to exist. A wave of cold dread washed over me. Something was very wrong here. This wasn't normal. This wasn't possible. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone. The battery was down to 8% now, but I needed light needed to see where I was. I turned on the flashlight and swept it across the surroundings. What I saw made my blood run cold. I was standing next to a dead tree with a hole in its trunk, the exact same tree where I had rested hours earlier, where I had placed my empty water bottle and bandana before the first truck stopped. And there in the hole were my bottle and bandana exactly as I had left them. I was back where I started. Somehow, impossibly, I had been brought back to the very spot where my strange journey had begun. Panic rose in my throat. Was I losing my mind? Had I imagined the whole thing? Had I fallen asleep by the tree and dreamed about the truck and the driver? But no, my watch showed that hours had passed. My legs were tired from walking. This was real, all of it. Somehow I had been caught in some kind of loop, returning to the same spot, no matter how far I traveled. I retrieved my water bottle and bandana from the tree hole with shaking hands. I needed to think to understand what was happening. If this was the same spot where I had first met the truck driver, then Nochixtlan should still be ahead in the direction I had been walking originally. Steeling myself, I decided to continue on foot. This time I wouldn't accept rides from anyone, especially not from white pickup trucks. I would walk all night if necessary, but I would reach Nochixtlan by my own power. The night wore on as I walked one foot in front of the other, determined to break whatever strange cycle I had fallen into. The road seemed endless, stretching into the darkness without signs or markers. No more cars passed by, which was both a relief and a concern. Was I on a road that no one used at night, or was there something keeping others away? As dawn began to lighten the sky, I finally saw something in the distance, building streets, signs of civilization. Exhausted but relieved, I quickened my pace. As I got closer, I could make out the name on a welcome sign, Nochixtlan. I had made it. Somehow, walking on my own, I'd broken the loop and reached my destination. The town was just beginning to wake up as I arrived. Early risers were opening shops and the smell of fresh bread wafted from a bakery. After the surreal night I had experienced, the normality of it all was almost shocking. I found my way to the guest house where I had made a reservation. To my surprise, they were expecting me. The owner's niece, who managed the bookings, welcomed me warmly. "We were worried when you didn't arrive last night," she said. "Your room has been ready since yesterday evening." "I had some transportation issues," I explained vaguely. "Is the room still available?" "Of course," she replied, showing me to a small but clean room. "You must be exhausted. Rest as long as you need." After a hot shower and a change of clothes, I felt almost human again. Hunger drove me to the small dining area where the niece offered me what was left of breakfast. As I ate, she sat across from me, turning the pages of a local newspaper. I hesitated, then decided to ask about my experience. "Something strange happened to me on the road last night." I began, unsure how much to share. "I was given a ride by a man in a white pickup truck, but he left me in the middle of nowhere. And then it seemed like I kept coming back to the same place." The young woman's expression changed, her casual interest turning to something more serious. She put down the newspaper and studied my face. "You accepted a ride from a man in a white pickup on the Oaxaca road?" I nodded. Yes, he didn't speak much. Middle-aged, weathered face, working hands. He drove for a while, then made me get out in a deserted area, and somehow I ended up back where he first picked me up. She was quiet for a long moment, then glanced toward the kitchen as if ensuring no one else was listening. "That road has stories," she said, her voice lowered. "Many years ago a man died there. They say he was a farmer who drove a white pickup truck. He was taking his produce to the market in Oaxaca, but he heard a strange noise in his truck and stopped to check. He didn't see the approaching bus that hit and killed him instantly. They found his body kilometers ahead. His pickup had its hazard lights flashing and the driver's door open. A chill ran down my spine as she continued. Despite this, many times people have reported seeing that same pickup stopped on the shoulder of the road with its turn signal blinking as if waiting to give someone a ride. No one gets in that truck anymore, no matter how far they have to walk. But I did, I whispered. She nodded solemnly. You rode with El Fantasma del Conductor, the ghost driver. They say he's trapped in a loop, reliving his last journey over and over, and sometimes he pulls others into his loop with him. But I escaped, I pointed out. I reached Nochixtlan. You walk, she said. That's the only way to break free. If you accept his ride, you'll never reach your destination. You'll just keep returning to where he first found you, trapped in his eternal journey. I sat in silence, trying to process this information. Ghost drivers, eternal loops, trapped souls, it all sounded like superstition, like the kind of story told to scare tourists or children. But I had lived it. I had experienced the loop firsthand. There's more, the niece added, leaning closer. Every year on the anniversary of his death, someone goes missing on that stretch of road. Local police have files full of reports, travelers who were last seen accepting a ride from a man in a white pickup truck. They're never found. When did he die? I asked, dreading the answer. November 2nd, 1973 inches, she replied. Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead. I checked my phone's calendar. Today was November 3rd. I had been on that road on the anniversary of the driver's death. But I survived, I said, more to reassure myself than anything. The niece nodded. You were lucky. Or maybe he wasn't really trying to keep you. Some say he's not malevolent, just lost confused, trying to complete a journey that was interrupted decades ago. That evening, I stayed in my room processing everything that had happened. The rational part of my mind tried to find logical explanations. Exhaustion, dehydration, maybe even mild hallucinations from the heat. But deep down, I knew what I had experienced was real. I decided to continue my journey the next day, taking a bus to my next destination rather than risking the road again. But that night, as I drifted off to sleep in my rented room, I dreamed of endless highways of returning again and again to the same point of a white pickup truck with its turn signal eternally blinking. When I woke the next morning, I felt a strange compulsion to check my belongings. Everything was there except my bandana, the one I had left in the tree hole and then retrieved. It was nowhere to be found. As I was checking out, I mentioned this to the niece. Perhaps you left it somewhere, she suggested. Maybe, I replied, though I was certain I had put it in my backpack. She seemed to hesitate, then said, If you drive back to Oaxaca, be careful on that stretch of road. And whatever you do, if you see a white pickup truck with its turn signal on, just keep driving, no matter what time of year it is. I promised I would thank her for her hospitality and left. As my bus pulled away from Nochixtlan, I found myself watching the roadside, intently, half expecting to see a white pickup truck parked on the shoulder. But there was nothing, just the empty highway stretching through the mountains. It wasn't until weeks later, when I was back home and looking through photos from my trip, that I noticed something strange. In a picture I had taken in Oaxaca the day before my night on the road, there was something in the background. A white pickup truck parked across the street. And leaning against it, barely visible but unmistakable, was a figure, a middle-aged man with a weathered face, watching me as I took the photo. The date stamp on the photo, November 2nd. They say on the highway between Oaxaca and Nochixtlan, if you travel at night and see a white pickup truck with its turn signal blinking, you should never stop. The driver may offer you a ride, may even take you part of the way, but you'll never reach your destination. Just keep returning to the same point, caught in his eternal loop. I was one of the lucky ones. I broke free. But sometimes when I'm driving on a deserted road at night, I check my rearview mirror more often than necessary, watching for the headlights of a white pickup truck. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I see them approaching, following, eternally driving the same stretch of road. According to local police records, that stretch of highway between Oaxaca and Nochixtlan has the highest rate of unexplained disappearances in the region. Most occur on November 2nd, but some happen at random throughout the year. The most recent was just 3 months ago, a tourist traveling alone who was last seen getting into a white pickup truck with its turn signal blinking. They never found him, just his bandana hanging from a dead tree beside the road. Would you stop if you saw a lone pickup truck with its turn signal flashing on a deserted road? It might be someone who needs your help or someone offering you a ride, but not necessarily home.